You've said that talent is the anchor of any good human capital strategy, that talent is, and it provides the essential skills required to execute on the corporate strategy. You've done a lot of work around morphing the business model as it relates to talent. I believe you said that it started out as a financial model, and you're now moving it into a different approach that has a much more direct impact on corporate strategy. Can you describe that a little bit?
Sure. Well, you are exactly right. I mean, companies have always tried to do, personnel planning. We call it now human capital planning, where they would take their business plan and they would translate the dollars into people, FTEs,
Yes.
full-time equivalents.
Yes.
And that was the human capital plan. It was, if we're going to make this much money, we need this many people. Well, is it the case with a lot of businesses? That plan goes out the window sometime in the first quarter, because you win programs, you lose programs. Products work, products don't work. And so the finances you based it on change, and the assumptions you make change. And so the plan goes out the window. It's also, that way of thinking about it is extremely reactive. From a human resources standpoint, that means you're just an order filler. They open recs, we fill recs.
Yes.
There's nothing really strategic about it.
Right.
And as our knowledge and our abilities and technology in particular, the use of analytics, the ability to mine data and connect dots in data so that it's not just data, but you can actually tell a story, enabled us to start to think about human capital the same way we think about any other element of the strategy. In a company like mine, our strategy, our integrated business plan focuses on, well, what technologies are we going to develop? What is happening in the customer community? Where are their priorities going to go? That translates into what programs are we going to pursue or continue to execute. And so now, using data, and in particular data analytics, we can start to look at, in a very discrete way, if this is your strategy, what are the critical skills necessary to execute that strategy? And then analyze what's happening in our workforce relative to those skills, what's happening in the labor force outside the company relative to those skills, and in its most evolved state, we start to do predictive analytics about not just what's happened, but what's going to happen, both in the labor force and the workforce, and marry those things together so that you can get a pretty discrete look at, if this is your business plan, these are the skills you're going to need, and what's going to happen relative to the internal and external dynamics associated with those skills. In other words, you can make and execute a strategy. Because some skills, sure, they're readily available, you can go out and get them. In a lot of companies, including ours, you can't. They're skills that have to be built over a long period of time. And that's the real power, because now if I need X over here, I have to start over here executing a plan against that strategy. And so it's a very exciting time for human resources, as a function, but it's also an exciting time for talent, because now talent is part of the strategy. In fact, increasingly companies recognize it underpins the strategy. You can't do anything else if you haven't done that.
Right. So it's not filling just orders, it's now actually driving where you intend to go. And we had a conversation a little bit about how you were watching the demographics of the labor force. And it's interesting because just yesterday I was with a group of business leaders in this area, and we were talking about the workforce issues. And it's the same. Honestly, it was almost a throwback to the 1990s of when they were talking about, we're not being able to attract the young engineers and the young technical, and how do we actually attract them to this area?
Right.
Well, the way our community is, the way our business community is, we have some challenges in them actually recognizing the entrepreneurial ecosystem that does exist. It's not as visible as it is in Palo Alto. I was also struck by the fact that, here it is 20 years later, right? We're still having that same conversation, and yet technology and the connectivity of organizations to their people is so much stronger and has so much more flexibility. Why are we worried about bringing them into the area in the first place, right? And that actually goes to sort of one of the cutting edge labor force plans that you're putting together for BAE.
Right. Well, you're exactly right, because you're giving a good example, and I'll give an example within our company.
Yes.
So in one of our businesses, one of our sectors, they're in a period of pretty significant growth, which is very exciting for us as a company. But when we looked at their internal dynamics of their labor force, and could see, as is true in a lot of companies, they're going to have an increase in retirements. And we were able to analyze and predict exactly where their attrition was going to happen. Mm-hmm. But we also looked at the labor force patterns in that part of the country. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the analysis, the gist was this: you are not going to be able to get enough people there to execute your plan. But there are people over here. In the exact example I'm giving, we said, you can't get them in Nashua, New Hampshire, but you can get them in Austin, Texas. Right. And so, and again, very exciting from a human resource standpoint, they literally changed their business plan to say, okay, we're going to migrate this work here and put the work where the people are, not the people where the work currently is. And the other thing that's exciting about kind of taking this more external view and not limiting our view of talent to just what's going on within the company is, you can see not just what's happening in the patterns of the labor force, but its composition. Yeah. Everybody talks about the millennials now, and do they have different expectations and things like that, and is it really a thing? Right. Because every generation looks at the generation that follows and says, oh, they're not as good, they're a bunch of slackers. Yeah, they're a bunch of slackers, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And the answer is that's not true. Yeah. But the truth is, because of readily available technology, readily available connectivity, the fact that we experience life through things like Amazon and there's an immediacy and again a connectivity, the emerging workforce is actually different. Mm-hmm. And behaves differently. And so we analyze that and say, hey, there's things that we can do to address some of the dynamics of that labor force, and there's things that just are that we can't address, which is fine too, because it means now you accept those things as part of the way you plan the workforce. Yeah. And because if you think about it, one of the biggest changes, and it's not like stereotypical. We're all like, they're going to change jobs X number of times over the course of their career, which is different than the employment model when I joined the workforce. Right. But that's not just a dynamic because millennials are somehow different. We've changed the deal. All of us have. Yes. There's not pension plans that say if you work for 30, if you're 55 with 30 years, you get a pension. Yep. And so we've signaled that we don't actually expect you to stay that long. Right. And so it forces you to, again, rethink how you're going to plan your workforce and making your benefits more portable, because that's attractive to somebody who you may not have for 30 years. Right. Right. And so, this connection between, information and data and analytics has actually empowered companies to start to view talent more strategically and not just as some transaction that we have to conduct.
Right. Right. Well, I love the way you say that. You take the work to where the people are, not the people to where the work is. Right. And I know some of the technology startups or technology companies would say, well, we've been outsourcing to technology developers for a long time. Where this is so cutting edge is that you're in government contracting. Right. Right? And your workforce has always needed to be practically co-located with your client. And now you're saying to them, you may not have your government facility down in Austin, but this is where the people are that you want to actually have performing on the contract that you've just awarded to us.